Thanks for tuning in. I'm Rosemary Armao, and this is an Armao on the Brink. This is a hard show for me to be doing on this episode. It was not a happy week in the Armao household. As many of you know, I live with and help care for my mother, who's just about 99 and has slipped into dementia. She slipped a little further this week. She was sitting at the kitchen table having breakfast, and the cats that have been here for years are jumping all around her. I'm sitting across from her, and she said, "When are we going home?" I was floored. I said, "Mom, this is home. You've lived here for 70 years." She just is convinced that she's at her mother's house and that somewhere down the road is her real home. So she's unmoored again. She doesn't know. She wants to go home, even though she is home. It's a terrible disease, dementia. We are scared of it and we don't talk about it. And so I've invited two people today and we're going to break that rule. We are going to talk about it. We have Will Doolittle, who is a longtime journalist and a wonderful writer. And he is married to a woman who has Alzheimer's. She is the main topic he writes about, and it brings tears to your eyes. Will is here. And we've asked Ruth Fish, who is a nurse practitioner with many years of service to people with and families who are coping with dementia. And she has some stories and some advice and a little bit of reassurance. It's been fun talking to her. I'm a little bit afraid. I just was telling them that once we get talking here, I'm going to have a hard time sticking to time limits. So, Will, can we start with you? Can you tell us the story of you and Belle, your wife?
Okay. How far back am I going now? I mean,
how did you meet?
Back to when I was 13.
That is a ways.
That's when we met for the first time. We're both from the North Country. I'm from Saranac Lake. She's from Lake Placid, and she actually was girlfriends with a friend of mine when I was 13 years old, and came over by bus from Lake Placid. So then we didn't meet again until we were adults. In the meantime, she had been married and separated and had two kids. We got back together, and we never were together, but we got together, and then we took it from there.
And how long ago was that you married?
We got married in 1990, so that was 34 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We adopted two kids. In 1996 and 98, but those two kids are the same age. They're 28 now, and we had a great time together. But then in 2017, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease.
Well, let me stop you there. What was the first sign that something was amiss? What made you go to the doctor in the first place?
It was her that noticed it. I didn't, at least not consciously. It wasn't something that I was thinking, oh, something's wrong with her. But she said to me, my brain feels fuzzy. My thinking feels fuzzy. And I said, okay, well, let's see a neurologist, let's have it checked out. And we went down to Albany. She took some tests. I think they're the tests that President Trump refers to and says he did great and passed, where you draw the clock and so on, which is like, it's not a test like, if you fail, that means you have Alzheimer's. So it's not really a test you do well on, but regardless, she took that test. She talked to the specialist down there, and the woman said, not sure. She said, I don't know. And then we went to this other guy, Dr. Zimmerman, who's considered like the sort of the real expert in this area. And he looked at their tests, and maybe he talked to her, and he said, "You have Alzheimer's disease." He was absolutely certain.
So it was soon after this, was it not, Ruth, that you met Belle and Will?
Actually, I think it was probably 2 years later, Will. Am I right about that? Because you saw someone else
at the Center for Excellence.
Right. You weren't you going someplace else? Didn't you go to Hudson Headwaters for a while?
No, I don't think so. I think.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember. I think we were just seeing Dr. Hoy, who was our general practitioner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then you're right, Rosemary. It was shortly after that I met Bella and Will in the office at a program that's called the Center for Excellence in Alzheimer's Disease, and started seeing them pretty regularly from then on.
And describe what they were like at the beginning. What do you remember from those early meetings?
Well, I previously knew both of them, somewhat well in a different environment. And so they seemed pretty much the same to me. And that's part and parcel of the disease. If you don't know someone well, and someone has a lot of what I call cognitive reserve, which Bella does have, you don't know that something's wrong. But then, those of us that deal with this all the time ask some other questions, and you start getting answers that are not accurate or slightly off, or, don't make great sense. And so, but she was very, very functional, extremely functional. She had a great sense of humor that came out several times in office visits. And the relationship and the communication between the two of them was great. I actually learned a lot by watching Will respond to her and some of her questions and some of her comments. She was very functional.
I think that Bella's reminds me of my mother. Our first hint that anything was wrong was when she put out her newsletter. She did a newsletter for the family, very popular. And her grandson called me and said, "What's wrong with Grandma? What's wrong with I said, "Nothing. Why?" And he goes, "Because there's a typo in the newsletter." That was the first flaw we ever saw. And then, of course, every issue after that had more and more things until she finally had to stop doing it. Right. But she also hid. Unlike your wife, my mother refuses to go to doctors. She does not. She doesn't want anything. She says at her age, if you go to a doctor, they'll just find something wrong. So she copes with it. But so she hid it. We did not know how bad it was until I had been working overseas and I came back for a summer break. And I stayed with her, and I called up my boss and said, I've got to stay here. I can't come back. It was amazing how far along she was. So Will, back to you. Tell the story then. So you find out that she's got this. I'm sorry, it's a really brutal diagnosis. It's not very hopeful. What was that like in the early days? How did you all cope with it?
Very hard. I mean, actually, I wasn't even there when Dr. Zimmerman told her that.
Oh my!
Wow,
she got
that
from
alone.
The car crying. Said, yeah, because I wasn't thinking that was going to happen. And I didn't. I just thought, I didn't really think anything, and I didn't know anything about Alzheimer's, and I didn't think there was anything wrong with her. So that was bad, and I definitely regret not being there. And then I'd say she was pretty firmly in denial. She said, "There's nothing wrong with me. I'm fine." Sort of like, "What is this anyway?" She was fairly combative about it. Dr. Zimmerman was an old guy, and she's like, "He's the one who has Alzheimer's disease."
Denial. You see that a lot, yes, Ruth?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Denial and difficulty, not wanting to go to the doctors, not wanting to get tests. It's horrible. And if I can just add something, it's not my style to come out and say, "You have Alzheimer's disease," particularly if someone is alone. It's just, however, having said that, Dr. Zimmerman is sort of a legend in the area, and he was brilliant. And he was old. He was in his 80s when he saw Bella, I believe. So it's not my style, and it really was probably not the best way to approach it, for sure, for me. So I didn't realize that it was that brutal, Will, and I didn't realize you went there.
It was actually worse than that, because Bella said, "Oh well, what's my life expectancy?" And he said 8 years, just like that. 8 years.
How many years?
8. Wow.
God.
Oh, my goodness.
Which we're coming up on in 6 months. So.
Oh.
Well, hopefully she doesn't remember that.
No, she doesn't.
That's what I do whenever I snap at my mother and I'm mean to her when I should not be. I say, okay, well, she won't remember it in 5 minutes anyway. That's a crutch. That's a crutch. Do you do that, Will, too?
Silver lining.
Yeah. So I have a friend who is in her 70s, and she, sort of like Bella, felt that her mind was getting fuzzy, and she went to a doctor and she was told, well, he was nicer, and he said, you have some mild cognitive loss. And she's terrified right now. There's denial, there's anger. She's, quit everything she was involved in because she doesn't think she'll be able to do it very long. What's the right way for this to be handled, Ruth?
Oh my goodness, that I understand what she's feeling. I completely understand what she's feeling, but that is the opposite of what she needs. I like to approach this disease as a family disease. It includes everyone in the family, and B, as it's a manageable chronic disease, and the better we manage it, the slower it will go and the longer people will live. So I would never tell anybody 8 years, ever in a million years. Bella had a lot of cognitive reserve. Now, what that means is you have more disease than is apparent by how someone functions, by function, vocabulary. And the cognitive reserve is something that you can continue to build upon. So there are sort of 3 areas that people really need to concentrate on. One is physical engagement, one is social engagement, and one is cognitive engagement. Social engagement is vital. You can do all the computer games in the world and use your brain, hours a day, but if you don't do it socially, you do not get the same effect. So that Bella goes out and she walks and she sees people and she goes downtown and she, engages in social as well as physical, as well as cognitive engagement, really helps to add cognitive reserve, helps to prolong her areas, the time that she's functioning. So your friend, Rosemary, needs to be social. Do not quit anything. In fact, if you decrease the amount of social engagement, then the dementia goes faster. If you as we get into later life, we have to continue the same amount of social engagement or have more. But if we decrease, then we're more at risk for cognitive decline. And we have research to prove that. So
my sisters and I drag my mother all over the state, all on trips to every family gathering. We have parties here around her. So it exhausts her physically. Unlike your wife, Will, my mother's also got all the. She's almost 100. So, I mean, there's other physical limits. So this puts a lot of pressure on you. You have to make sure that she gets out. Tell me, Will, what a typical day with your wife is like.
Well, it has changed a lot over the 7.5 years. But now, first of all, I get up around 4, and that's my time for doing some writing. Then, she gets up, usually gets out of bed like between 7 and 7:30. We have breakfast, we have coffee, we have toast. We hang out downstairs. Then often, these days she's feeling real sleepy during the day. So sometimes she kind of feels sleepy after breakfast and will sort of drift in and out. I think that's partly from the disease, partly from medication she's taking. in the mid-morning, a lot of times we go into town with our dog, Ringo. We walk around a little, then we sit outside at the coffee shop, have a coffee. Sometimes we see people and chat. Then, we take another walk around through the city park. We go home. We'll hang out. We'll have some lunch. And then we'll take a longer walk in the afternoon. It's usually through the woods or through the park with a dog. And sometimes we'll watch something on TV. Usually at some point during the day, Bella will go out for a walk by herself. This has been sort of something that has been happening a lot recently.
She gets away from you, or she does not want you to be with her?
Doesn't want me to be with her.
Oh,
no.
my.
She wants to take a walk by herself. So, I've had to figure out various ways of coping with this. The main thing is I always insist she takes her purse with her phone in it, which I can track. So usually I let her go by herself for 10 or 15 minutes, and I track her on the phone. And then I go out, and then I kind of follow her around in the car, because if I try to pick her up too soon, she'll be angry.
Angry at
you. Get in the car. So I follow her around and try to gauge like when, I think she's going to be receptive, which is often like 30 or 40 minutes. Or if she's going into a place that has a lot of traffic and isn't really safe, then I'll, approach her and try to get her to get in the car. So
you're making me feel a little bit happy, if that's the right word, that mom is not mobile. I can't imagine the stress of that 30 or 40 minutes.
Right. Yeah.
Great.
I know. It gives me palpitations.
I know. My heart is thumping on that. Yeah.
Well, it's not great. So yeah.
But you know what? I think that actually shows that she has some moments of clarity when she knows that she's always been independent. She used to drive to Ticonderoga by herself in all kinds of weather. And I think, well, that she's just saying, I can do this, and I'm going to do it, darn it all. She's always been, she'll be combative with you verbally if you try to hold her down. So I think that's sort of like the real Bella shining through. I mean, she's still the real Bella, but you know what I mean.
Yes, no, I do. I agree with you. I mean, she always was extremely determined and even stubborn person, and very independent. And I do think that is reflected in her, urge to get out there by herself. But it had gotten to a kind of a crazy point. Not that long ago, a month or two ago, like this summer, where she was like taking 7 or 8 walks a day. And basically our whole day was taken up with, her going on walks and me chasing after her. So that just got to be too much.
How did you turn that around?
Well, things changed a bit because we had she actually had a day where she had 2 seizures and ended up in Glens Falls Hospital.
Oh, dear.
And after that, then she got more prescriptions, anti-seizure medication, and we decided to start giving her kind of a stronger anti-agitation medicine, lorazepam, and that has like made her a little sleepier, but also less inclined to, take off all the time.
I'm going to interrupt the narrative here. We're going to come back in a minute. We're talking to Will Doolittle, who is the caretaker for his wife who has Alzheimer, his job he has been doing for over 7 years, and with Ruth Fish, who is the nurse practitioner who has worked with the couple for many years in Glens Falls. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to On the Brink with Rosemary Armao. That would be me. I'm talking today with Will Doolittle, who is a writer and a caretaker for his wife, Bella, who has Alzheimer's, and with Ruth Fish, who is a nurse practitioner who has worked with Bella and other dementia patients for years. It's a horrible disease. My mother is in the throes of it now. And we're talking with Will about what a day is like. She's pretty advanced. Your wife is pretty advanced after 7 years with this. So what is that like for you? You're chasing her, you're cooking for her, you're making sure she gets food. Do you have time for yourself ever? Except for that 4 a.m. wake up, which is another abuse.
Not much, no, very little.
Oh,
yeah, but I've gotten used to that.
Is there anyone else who can look after her? I have 4 sisters. I'm very lucky, and I can take trips. I can go away for a weekend, and they come in and fill in. And mom, loves it. She's with her other kids.
Well, my son's here now, Zoe, and we have a daughter who lives down near Kingston. She comes home pretty often on the weekends, and she actually does a lot of cooking for us. Zoe actually does some cooking for us. That's something that they realize that I'm not really great at or not really interested in. So they really have helped out. Our daughter Ginny lives down in Boston, and she helps a lot. She comes and sees us, and I talk to her on the phone sometimes, which, is helpful. One hour a week I dedicate to going to therapy. And that...
Oh, that's good. For yourself, you mean?
Yes, just me. And that does help.
That's excellent. Have you ever used hospice? We called in community hospice this week. My sisters made me promise that if it ever felt like it was too much, I would say something. And I did 2 weeks ago. I said, she's falling and I can't get her. She doesn't hurt herself. She kind of like lets herself drop to the floor. And she says she's well padded enough. She'll never get hurt. But once she's on the floor, I can't get her up again. And I can't tell you how anxious that makes me. So we've brought in hospice. I love them. They help get supplies for me. Incontinence supplies and medical supplies for some of her, like rashes and things. They check her for bed sores and her heartbeat. They bring in a chaplain who I thought my mother would be. She's so rude and awful to people who she thinks, I'm just going to go into the home. I'll save you the trouble. She's like that. But the chaplain jollied around her. I'm so impressed with them. Have you ever tried that? And Ruth, I want you to tell us about any other resources that I have 2 sisters who are nurses, and they were unaware that we could use hospice, and we qualified for it. It's Medicare covered. Are there other sources that we should know?
There actually, New York State has lots of resources that are dedicated for this type of situation. Bella would not qualify at this point for hospice. We consider her only in the moderate stage, really, not end stage, any stretch. She's quite functional. She walks and, she can't cook and she can't, do anything complex, but she's quite functional, Will. Would you agree with me?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do want to tell you, Ruth, that the way this came about was my sister was having a meal with a friend of hers who's a doctor, an oncology doctor. That's who she used to work for. And said, I wish you could just say that my mother had cancer so we could get her on hospice. He goes, oh, your mother would qualify. I would sign for it.
Yeah, she would.
Because of her age. So she may not qualify again after 6 months.
Right.
But for now, they put her on right away. We never thought of that. Never thought of it at all.
Well, we actually refer lots of people to hospice because it's a great service. And, we can tell, and the families can tell, and very often the patients can tell that they're ready, that they want to go. I recently, about a year ago, I had a patient that had Lewy body dementia, not Alzheimer's, but it's still dementia. But with that kind of dementia, walking is very difficult and functioning is very difficult, but the memory is a little bit more preserved. And I can remember making a house call, and I took his hand. He remembered my name, which was shocking because he really was quite debilitated, had not been eating. And I asked him what I could do for him. And he started praying the Lord's Prayer.
Wow.
So I think he was telling me, and because we'd already had the conversation, why am I here? Why don't I go? Why am I here? I think he was telling me he wanted to go. So we referred him to hospice. He was at his daughter's home with her. Okay. And he died about 2 weeks later, but they did have hospice support. So, we refer to hospice a lot, and they're almost always accepted. And I've had a couple of patients, Rosemary, you should remember this, that have been recertified after 6 months.
Yeah, they already told us that was a possibility. But even for just now, I feel like a weight has been lifted a bit.
Absolutely. You don't feel so alone.
Yeah, I have someone I can ask questions of all the time.
Absolutely.
So, Will, any tips that you can give now that you've been into this for 7 years and you quit your job? I didn't ask her about this. You stopped working at a newspaper because you had to stay home and be a full-time caretaker.
Yeah, not right away. I mean, Bella didn't even stop working right away. That was spring of 2017, and she worked up until the beginning of 2018. So she finished that semester, and then she worked the next semester. She worked at a community college. So, and then I worked for, a few years. I mean, Bella was, the changes were really, really slow. Mm-hmm. It's inexorable, but it's, but it's very slow. It's hard to track. Mm-hmm. But eventually it became clear to me that I had to stop. So I did.
It's tough. It's really tough. For me, the scariest thing, Will, was not her behavior and, her, that period of time she went through that she was so combative. For me, the scariest time was when she was still driving. And she insisted on being able to drive. And, as a caregiver, and, somewhat responsible, I was like, oh my God, you don't want to take anything away that she can still do, but yet she needs to be safe.
Yeah, that was bad. And I don't think I handled that perfectly right.
You did pretty well, considering you did. We had many conversation about it.
It was very difficult. It's very difficult because the change is so slow, Mm-hmm. And you think, oh, they're okay one day, and the next day, well, they're maybe worse. So not the next day, but like the next month.
Right.
But they're still okay, I guess. And it's just very hard to know. When do you say no? Right. Absolutely not.
Right.
It was. There were some definitely white knuckle times in there.
Yes, for sure.
Aside from the change being so slow, what strikes me is how the moments of lucidity, you mentioned that, Ruth, that there's good days and bad days, but there's these striking moments. My mother is killer at Trivial Pursuit. Some obscure question about, I don't know, chess or football or something, and she'll get the answer right.
Wow.
And we all look around and go, what? Where did that come from?
Right. Well, the stuff that got embedded in her brain early on is there. Sometimes she can retrieve it and sometimes she can't. And, that reminds me, the thing about going home is she remembers that her home was where she was when she was 5 years old. And that's what she remembers best.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right now. And so I always tell families when they say, I want to go home, you typically say, we'll go home tomorrow. You don't say typically, although it sounds like you guys handled it well, you don't say, you are home, because in her mind, her home is where different. She was.
I couldn't figure this one out. The best advice I ever got, and I've read so much about this trying to cope with it, I'm sure you have too, Will, is to treat it like an improv skit. So you never say no, and you just go with it. So when she goes, when are we going home? I'll say, okay, well, we'll go home tomorrow. How's that? Can you wait till then?
Perfect.
Yeah, I can. What should we do today instead? And then she's distracted.
Perfect.
So,
Perfect.
Yeah.
I get that a lot too. I want to go home, but a lot of times with Bella, that precedes like, well, I'm leaving. Walking out the door.
Well, Bella called me up once, probably 2 summers ago. Yeah, you were there, Will. You had just had surgery. And she was convinced that Will was going to take her house away. She just was convinced. And she had many other delusions as well. So I said to her on the phone, well, Bella, he cannot take your house. You let me talk to him and I will tell him right now. So I talked to Will and I said, okay, don't take her house. And so, she was satisfied with that. We always say, don't argue and, don't try to, bring reality into the situation. But
no, there is no reality. The other thing that you must have is the repeated question over and over and over again. I now judge the length of time on a trip by how many times my mother will say, where's my wallet? Did I bring my wallet? Who has my wallet? And or the other thing is I'll answer it differently every time she asks. Oh, I just flung it out the window, Mom. It was taking up too much space. Wallet? What wallet? And she is unsure if I'm joking or if it's real now. But that drives me crazy.
Yeah. It does after a while. You're absolutely. That's why it's a family disease.
I feel so bad. That she's irritating me. It's like when you're sitting next to someone on a plane and they're coughing, and they don't want to cough. They're not doing it to irritate you, but it does irritate the hell out of you. And that's what Alzheimer, that's what dementia does. It irritates you.
Yep. So, Will, how do you handle that?
The questions, the same questions. I pretend to myself that I'm hearing it for the first time. And
that only works for me the first 8 times. Number 9, I lose it.
That's true.
I've had a long time to get used to this. And I've gone through different stages of, annoyance and I'm going crazy and, so on. And I feel like I'm getting to a point of kind of resignation and almost like Zen acceptance. It's like this constant challenge to my psyche, saying,
wow.
Everything that you try to do is going to fail. Every plan you make is not going to work out. Every moment of your day is going to be difficult and annoying. Now deal with it. And it's like, you of course, no one would choose this, but when you have no choice, you sort of try to think, well, how can I possibly do this and not lose my mind?
I have to say, I do like people telling me how great I am that I'm taking care of my mother. I feel like a saint. Is that horrible? It's true. That helps. No, it's like, yes, I am. I'm going right to heaven.
It is
true. Rosemary, not every family is like yours and not every family is like Will's. So, know that and know that as difficult as it is, you're making a big difference.
Yeah. I've never. I sometimes hate that that I'm in the middle of it, but I never have regretted it.
Right.
You know what it does make me think, and I wonder about your wife's biological children. Will I walk into a room and I forget what I came in for. I forget my keys. The other day, I drove to one sister's house when I was supposed to go to another sister's house. As soon as that happens, it's like, oh no, it's happening to me. Now I'm going to become like Mom. Do your kids worry about that?
Yeah. Yes. Jenny, who's in her 40s and lives in Boston. I mean, I think that has been something that has concerned her. Yeah. Apparently, there's some tests you can take now.
I don't want to. Oh dear.
Oh, exactly.
Right. You have to think really clearly about what you want to know and what you don't want to know, particularly as science moves forward. We can find out more, and genetic testing and all those things.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if we want to know for sure.
I would that would be one that I would not want to know if I were in that circumstance.
Not until they find a cure.
Well, exactly. About it, like, really, how is that helpful?
No, even getting a diagnosis, I'm not quite sure how that's helpful or hopeful. Either one.
Well, I'll answer that question.
Okay, that's why I bring it up.
Yes, it's important to get a diagnosis, and you don't have to have. I often have this discussion. You don't have to have the exact word or an official. What kind of problems do I have? Cognitive impairment, but people need to know that it's chronic, that there are things that can be done. It's important to be social. It's important to be physical. It's important to eat right. It's important to rule out, all the reversible things. There are reversible causes of dementia. So it's important to make sure you don't have one of those reversible things. And then once it's confirmed that you have cognitive impairment, it's really important to stay physical and social and cognitively engaged. So
now, Ruth, you're sounding like one of those health professionals here. This is that's important for every person as they age. You
yes,
say
it
like,
is.
oh, you don't have dementia, so you don't have to exercise. No, you're just talking about healthy living. So
I am. Isn't that interesting? It doesn't have to cost a fortune. You don't have to join a gym. You don't have to have $1,000 worth of medicines. You just have to go for a walk, and you have to, play Monopoly, and you have to, read a book. Those kinds of things. Pretty cheap stuff.
Yeah. So, Will, continuing on this line, it's you now. Do you think about, you have to, I know I do. Do you think about your end? If you were in the situation that she's in, what would you want done?
Yeah, I mean, I think about that as a guide, to help me, figure out how we're going to spend our time, what we're going to do, which is, I think this is what I want, which is what Bella and I are doing, which is just to deal with it day by day, but not really do anything different. Just live our lives and try to enjoy ourselves as much as possible.
Wow. I'm not sure I would say the same. My thoughts are darker. My sisters are even more bleak than I do. They say Mom would not want to be like this. She's not herself. It's not the mother we had. She's a different mother.
No, I agree with that, but that doesn't mean there's not value in your life.
Yeah. You have to. Now we sound like we're talking about a pet. How's the quality of life? Oh, she still eats a lot. She likes her. Not ready to put her down yet. Oh dear. Yeah, it's easy to slip into these conversations.
Of course, it makes you think. But there's also a difference between your mom's age and Bella's age.
Absolutely, I know
that's a big factor.
That's why I want it. One of the reasons I want it, Will, on, because it's a different disease when depending on the stage of life that you're dealing with it. We're going to take another break. We're talking with Will Doolittle and Ruth Fish, who are caretaker and healthcare provider for people with dementia. And I'm going to have them come back and tell some stories. That's why I invited them on. They tell amazing stories about this awful disease, and I want you to hear them. We'll be right back. Welcome back to On the Brink. We're talking about dementia. I'm going to ask Will Doolittle, who is a former newspaper reporter, still a great writer. He began some time ago, maybe you can tell us about that, Will, writing about his wife's experience as she copes with dementia, as they as a family cope with dementia. When did you first start writing about her and why?
Well, the why I'm not really sure about. I mean, it came naturally because I'd always written about my family at the paper, and done a lot of calls about things that were going on. It was early on. It was about 6 months after her diagnosis, I think. And so I did columns, and Bella and I did a podcast. And we did that.
She was part of it at first.
Part of it at first. She's really good at it, like a lot better than I was. I'm like a writer on the radio, kind of like can't get the words out, and actually using.
Yeah, I know about that. Believe me.
But Bella's great. I mean, she's a great storyteller. She's funny, so anyway, it was good. And we did that. We did about one a month for a long time, like about 4 years or something. And then we stopped doing them, and before I left the paper, and then I left the paper. But now I'm writing about it again for the Substack that I do.
Do you ever worry about exposing your wife, who's in a vulnerable position, as in my mother, when you write about them? You're telling like private stuff, and I've read your stuff. It's pretty raw sometimes, and I mean, I read everything I put out about my mother to her, but she doesn't really have consent. That's not really, that's not going to get me out of trouble. Are we exploiting them?
Well, I mean, I guess you could say yes, but, I mean, I guess you just have to balance or think about, what the benefit is to you, and as the writer, to you as the person who's taking part in this, and what the value is to other people.
I bet you get the same response from people that I do, which is thank you, and they tell you their story. That happened to my mother. This happened to my father. This is happening to my husband.
Yeah.
We all are going through it. Will, can I get you to read one of your columns or part of one of your columns? I want my listeners to hear how really deep and thoughtful they are.
Well, this one is probably a little more relevant. It's one I wrote recently about anger, getting annoyed, getting angry, and how that goes. It's about 2.5 pages. I mean, do you want me to read the whole thing, or?
Well, just reading. If we get too long on time, I'll just cut you off. I'm an editor. No problem chopping you down.
All right. A friend who is also married to someone with a brain disorder called the other day with a question. What do you do when you get mad? She said. Alzheimer's is a banquet of frustration with annoyance and anger always on the plate. I could get annoyed, I tell myself 10 times a day. When Bella can't figure out how to get out of the car, or when she stands by the car door and asks, am I getting out? And when I say yes, she climbs back in. When I take her sneakers off so she can change her leggings, but once the leggings are off, she wants them back on. When she agrees to watch TV, but after 10 minutes wants to go out. And when we go for a walk, after 10 minutes, she wants to go home. But I don't shout or shake my head or heave a big sigh. Here you go, I say, untangling her seatbelt. Come with me, I say, gesturing her away from the car door. You want to put them back on, I say, about their leggings? Give me your foot. My dog just walked in here. I have time in my days. I might as well use it on repetitions and reassurances. I'm not happy about it, though. I admit that. I do get mad sometimes, and when I do, it feels in my anger I'm reaching out for the Bella whom I met and loved and has disappeared, like I'm waving my arms around in a dark closet as I look for her and call out. I want to get earrings, she said Tuesday as we were driving down to spend the morning in Saratoga Springs. You have a lot of earrings at home, I said. No, I don't, she said, then shut up and refused to talk to me. If you're giving me the silent treatment, I'm going to turn around. I'm not driving down to Saratoga with you if you're not talking to me, I said. I turned around at exit 16 and started back, but she spoke before we reached exit 17. I apologize, she said. All right, let's go to Saratoga then, I said. I got mad on Friday, too, after she walked away from me in the parking lot of the Aviation Road Stewards, back into the Maplewood apartment complex, and out onto the road, ignoring my pleas to get back in the car. She said something critical about me after we finally got home. I just chased you around Aviation Road for 45 minutes after you walked away from the Stewards for no reason, where we went because you wanted a cold drink. And you wouldn't get in the car or listen to me, and I had to get Ringo and follow you around, afraid you were going to walk into the road. Do you have any idea what it's like to be me in this situation? She looked confused. Sit by yourself for a while, I said, and went outside and mowed the lawn, a chore I'd been wanting to get done for at least a week. After all of this, when we were sitting at the butcher block and drinking cold cans of sparkling water, she apologized again. It's hard, I said. It's hard to be us. It's hard for both of us. I'm sorry I got so mad, but sometimes I can't help it. Sometimes I don't squelch it. And still sometimes, as I thrash around in anger, I find her hand.
That's so great. Ruth, let me throw it to you. You have dealt with a lot of patients. Do you have a favorite or a success story with dealing with this that you can tell us about?
Well, I have, as I said, I have lots of little vignettes. I have times that when I listen to what, and I had already read that in the newspaper, that brings tears to my eyes, and I often cry with people. And I have other times that things are so funny that we laugh together. But a couple of really brief stories. I had a couple from up north, and they were both in their 80s, and she had dementia. And she was pretty angry about dementia. She had been a bit of an irritable woman her whole life, but her husband was just beside himself. He just didn't know how to handle it well. He just was, and they lived in the North Country, didn't have a lot of support, and we hooked him up with some resources, but he just wasn't comfortable. So anyway, he came into my office one day and asked to see me before I went into the exam room. So I took him aside, and he was sobbing. He said, I just don't know what to say to her. And I said, well, give me some examples and I can help you. And he said, well, I said to her the other day, I love you. You're my wife. And she turned around and she said to me, you am not your wife. My wife is you are not my husband. My husband is a woman. And he was beside himself. He didn't know what to say.
Yeah, that's a shocker.
It was a total, they're in their 80s. He just didn't know what to say. And my other also poignant example of what was said, and then I'm going to tell a brief story about Bella. I had a patient in his early 80s, and his wife was about 80. And she'd been taking care of him for a while. He was somewhat functional, but definitely declining. And they got in bed. She told me the story when in front of him when they were in the office. They got in bed one night, and he found her hand and said to her, "What's your name?" And she said, "My name is Sue." Of course, that's not her real name. "My name is Sue. What's your name?" And he said, "My name is Bob." And then a moment went by, and he said to her, "What's your last name?" And she said, "My last name is Smith. What's your last name?" And he said, "Huh, that's funny. My last name is Smith too." So here they are lying in bed holding hands, and he's finding it so strange that they both had the same last name. But she was laughing and he was smiling. I don't know that he understood it, but it just it gave her a little chuckle.
Oh, that's
and then
great.
The story I have about Bella, I may have mentioned this before, but way back at the beginning, we were talking about the trajectory of the disease, and Bella was well read and she knew or suspected what would be happening, and she said to me, well, someday I'm going to be incontinent and that's going to be awful. And then she said, but wait a minute, I won't know I'm incontinent, so who cares? Will, do you remember that?
Yeah. I remember being.
Oh my God, I laughed. And she laughed too. I mean, we all laughed. So, you have to take the laughs when you can get them.
Yeah, it is true. And and there is humor in all of this. You find it in your writing, Will, and I do. My mother will create a huge mess and then look at it like shocked and say, how did that happen?
Right. Where did this come from?
Yeah. Who did that? Oh, like yes. It's we have, as I was afraid, run out of time. I could keep talking on this and maybe I'll invite you back. I would really like to hear how things progress. And I know it doesn't really progress. That's the horribleness about the disease. But Will, my last question is this. Will you have Bella listen to this podcast?
No, I'm at this point, it's not something she wants to talk about. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, I mean, that was okay for a while, but as the things got more severe, she didn't want to talk about it.
I can understand that. We traditionally end my podcast with a toast, hold up my virtual glass here. And today's toast is to caregivers, which both of you are. And I'm trying to be a good one. And more than that, to love that carries you through even these horrible times, that connect us to people, that lead us forward, that make us think about ourselves. That's what it really matters in life. And I include this topic in my podcast because while you talk about politics and wars and terrorism and all the bad stuff, there's bad stuff that happens in families too. And we get through it by acting in the right way, which you so much are doing. Thank you, Will. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. And thank you, Rosemary.